Hi, thank you for joining the Bipartisan Policy Center for today's event on paid family leave and the workforce. My name is Ben Giddis, and I'm Associate Director for Economic Policy at BPC. With 8.8 million job openings, employers are still struggling to find workers. In this environment, lawmakers are prioritizing policy solutions to reduce workforce barriers and incentivize a return to work. So today, we'll explore the role that paid family leave can play in supporting labor force participation and discuss a variety of policy options to provide greater access to the benefit. To kick off the discussion, we'll first hear from Senator Deb Fischer, who has led the charge in implementing a federal employer paid family medical leave tax credit that helps employers afford to provide the benefit. She'll discuss the importance of providing paid family leave and her continuing work to expand access to the benefit. Then, I'll present the findings from BPC's most recent poll on the barriers keeping American adults out of the workforce. Our poll shows that non-working Americans face significant caregiving and health-related barriers to joining the labor market. It also shows that paid family and medical leave is crucial for many of them to begin or return to work. Lastly, Political's Eleanor Mueller will lead a discussion with paid leave program directors from the states that are at the cutting edge of paid family leave policy. They'll explore what different program structures look like and the role that paid leave plays in boosting and retaining the supply of workers. So for now, let's kick it over to Senator Fischer.
Hi, this is Senator Deb Fischer from Nebraska. As many of you know, I introduced the first ever federal tax credit in this country to support paid family and medical leave. I launched that tax credit as a way to address the challenges many working families face. My program, which Congress extended through 2025 with bipartisan support, supports up to 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave for employees. This tax credit is not a mandate, but it provides incentive and flexibility to expand access to paid family leave. With more than half of the women in the United States working as primary breadwinners, we all know that workplace flexibility has become a basic necessity. That flexibility is necessary both so that families can meet caregiving obligations and so that employers can balance employees' work responsibilities with their personal needs. Our goal with the tax credit is to help more small to mid-sized employers, think small businesses or mom and pop operations, and offer better benefits to working class families. We are proud of the impact the tax credit has already had, but there's no question that more can be done. We're now working on follow-up legislation to expand and extend this credit, as well as smooth out some technical issues. By improving the program and providing small employers with more certainty, we're making sure that more businesses will consider offering paid family leave. Thank you to all of today's participants and to the Bipartisan Policy Center for putting together such an important event. I look forward to working together in a bipartisan fashion to continue supporting working families.
Thank you, Senator Fischer, for those really insightful remarks. So now I'll go over the results of our latest poll, which we teamed up with Artemis Strategy Group to understand what were the barriers preventing prime age adults from the workforce and the role that paid family leave can play in helping them return to work. There we go. Sorry, a little trouble with the clicker there. So to start off, I want to first discuss who we were surveying in this poll. So we did a study specifically of prime age adults who are not working. This includes about 24 million prime age Americans between the ages of 25 to 54 who are either out of the workforce and unemployed. Those who are out of the workforce make up about 85% of this population. Those are folks who are not working and are also not looking for work. It also includes 15% of this population being unemployed. These are folks who are not working, but are looking for work. Most of our analysis will focus on those who are out of the workforce, but the unemployed population provides an important comparison to understand how distinct these populations are, and really helps us evaluate the different barriers to entering the workforce for them. So our first and most important finding, I believe, is when we asked our respondents about the main reasons they're not being employed. In the blue, you'll see the responses for those who are out of the workforce and not looking for work. And in the red, you'll see the responses for those who are unemployed and are looking for work. For those who are out of the workforce, 7 out of 10 said the main reason they were not working was either because they were caring for others or they had a personal health condition that was preventing them from working. Specifically, 37% said the main reason was that they were caring for others, and the lion's share of that was folks who were caring for children. Another 35% said that the main reason they weren't working was because they had a physical, mental, or behavioral health reason. Now, if we'll jump down to difficulty finding work, only 3% of people who are out of the labor force and are of prime age years say that difficulty finding work is the main reason they're not being employed. So this idea of discouraged workers, folks who give up looking for work because they're unable to find a job, so they leave the labor force, that's a very small portion of the folks who are out of the labor force and are between the ages of 25 and 54. And it suggests that this population faces really long-term barriers to entering the labor force that may not necessarily be directly tied to economic conditions. On the contrary, for the unemployed population in red, difficulty finding work was the leading main reason that this population was not working, with 38% saying that difficulty finding work was the reason that they're not employed. So given that those who are out of the workforce face these longer-term barriers to work, we decided to also dig into what different benefits or working conditions would best enable them to return to the workforce. And what we found was that paid family leave and other solutions that enable them to balance their personal health or family caregiving needs with the responsibilities of a job were among the leading factors. To start off, when we asked about a wide range of policy options or benefits, we found that 15% said that a paid family and medical leave benefit would be the #1 most important benefit for them to return to the workforce. While it may sound small, it was virtually the same as compensation or bonuses. So to me, I found that very important finding because you'd think that for folks who are considering work, the most important factor would be just the bottom line of how much they're going to get paid. But what this survey shows is that for this population who faces caregiving or health-related reasons for not barriers to work, a paid family and medical leave benefit was virtually just as important. We also found that 19%, or 1 out of 5, said that a flexible work arrangement was the single most important thing to enable them to be able to enter the workforce. So between flexible work arrangements and paid family medical leave, about a third of the sample are saying that in order to look for work and enter the labor force, they need some sort of solution that helps them balance their caregiving and health needs with the duties of a job. We also dug a little more deeply into paid family and medical leave and asked about the different components and the ability of those benefits to be able to help these adults work. And what we found is that a large chunk of them who are not working because of caregiving or health reasons said that a paid leave benefit would indeed help them work. So starting with parental leave, 39% of those who are not working because they're caring for children said that they would still be employed if their previous employer had offered them a paid parental leave benefit. 45% say that they would be much more likely to return to work going forward if a future employer offered that benefit. Likewise, those who are not working because they are caring for ill loved ones or elderly parents say that if their previous employer had offered them a family caregiving leave benefit, they would still be working today. And if a future employer offered them that benefit, they'd be much more likely to return to work. Lastly, those who are not working because they have a personal health condition, about a third say that if their previous employer had offered a paid personal medical leave or temporary disability insurance, they would still be working today and they would have kept their job. And 37% say that if an employer going forward were to be able to offer them this benefit, or if they had access to this benefit, they'd be much more likely to return to work. So our survey shows that paid family and medical leave can play a really important role in helping those who are out of the workforce to re-enter or find a new job. It's also important to note that a lot of states are already leading the way. In particular, 13 states in the District of Columbia have mandatory social insurance policy design paid family and medical leave programs. And another 8 states have a voluntary system that largely relies on private insurers to provide access to benefits. Today, we are fortunate to have a program directors from states that are leading the way in the next phase of paid family and medical leave benefits. Specifically, we have program directors from Oregon, Maryland, Connecticut, and New Hampshire. Oregon, Maryland, and Connecticut have all implemented laws in the last few years, with Connecticut rolling out a new law, social insurance law in 2022, Oregon just implementing a new law this week, and Maryland working on implementing its latest law over the next couple of years. We also have our program director from New Hampshire, which has a very unique private insurance and voluntary system. And we're excited to hear from all of them today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Politico's Eleanor Mueller, who's going to lead that discussion. Thank you.
Eleanor, you're on mute.
All right, take 2. Very excited for today's conversation with our state officials. Like Ben mentioned, all of their paid leave programs are, so different, and there's a ton of different considerations to take into consideration here. And so I want to start with introducing our panelists. We're joined this morning by DJ Betancourt, who is the Deputy Insurance Commissioner of the state of New Hampshire. We've got Aaron Choquette, who is the CEO of Connecticut's Paid Leave Authority. Karen Hum-Elba, who is the Director of Paid Leave Oregon. And last but not least, Elliot Skur, who is the Assistant Secretary for the Maryland Department of Labor. Thank you, all 4 of you, for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So we're going to dive into that very thing that, I just touched on and Ben mentioned, which is just how different all of these programs are. And, no one knows better than you yourself what differentiates your program from other states. And so I'm hoping we can just dive in with a quick overview of what you feel your state, does differently, whether that's something it does well, something it does not as well. And, if you're in the process of setting up your program, what are those factors that you're taking into consideration? And, DJ, we'll go ahead and we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I think first and foremost, it's important to appreciate that in our case, necessity was the motherhood of invention. I started with this program when I was the policy director for Governor Sununu prior to coming here to the New Hampshire Insurance Department. And the governor appreciated the desire for this coverage. He understood its impact on workforce. We saw a lot of the same numbers that Ben just presented earlier. And in addition to that, we appreciate that the majority of New Hampshire's population is located in the southern tier of our state. And so we're constantly competing for workforce with Massachusetts. But at the same time, we wanted to avoid the mistakes or some of the pitfalls that we identified in other states who had implemented these programs prior to us taking it up. The other thing that was important for the governor is that he did not want to expand state bureaucracy. And he sure as heck didn't want any additional or increased taxes to prop up the program. What we were looking for was a voluntary private market approach, both because of our live free or die spirit, but also because we wanted experts to run the program and to transfer the risk of the program to an insurer to shield the state budget and ultimately taxpayers. And so, that said, because insurers are typically unable to project how many will voluntarily take up coverage and how to properly establish a financially sound premium, we didn't have any private carriers in our market that were offering this product. And so we remedied that problem by providing our state employees, approximately 10,000 of them, with the paid family leave benefit. In turn, those employees serve as the foundation of the risk pool, which is then administered by an insurance carrier in the commercial market. In our case, it is MetLife is our partner. And so because MetLife knows the number of minimum covered lives, so in this case, the 10,000 state employees, it had the ability to set appropriate premiums. And so therefore, from there, we obviously require that MetLife make that coverage, that benefit available to businesses and individuals who voluntarily desire it. So that's a bit of a high level view of our program.
Thanks, DJ. And then Aaron, we'll go to you next. Take us away on what sets Connecticut's paid leave program apart?
Thank you so much, Eleanor. So in Connecticut, Connecticut Paid Leave Authority is a quasi-public agency so that we can be a little bit more nimble, a little bit more efficient, a little bit more economical than a traditional state agency. Our program is entirely employee funded. We received some seed money from the state appropriation process, which we've already paid back. And really everything that we do comes directly from the 0.5% tax deduction or contribution, as we call it, from Connecticut workers. So we at the authority collect those contributions. We work with employers to make sure that they're registered and paying properly. We also offer a voluntary plan alternative option, which we manage to make sure that plans offer equivalent or better benefits, and we audit those private employer plans to make sure that the employees are getting what they need. And we have a relationship with a third-party administrator who handles claims administration. This is slightly different than New Hampshire because it's not that the state has its employees being covered by an insurer. Rather, we're using an expert to handle the claims administration on our behalf with our close supervision and partnership. And so those are some of the things that make us different than some of the other states.
Karen, you next. Can you walk us through just briefly how Maryland's paid leave program is a little bit different than the two we've heard about so far?
Oh, sorry, okay. Did you? Yeah, it's okay. I'm from Oregon, so I just wanted to make sure that I
clarify it.
It's okay. I think Elliot and I were both like, maybe it's a quiz, but thank you. In Oregon, we actually run our paid leave program out of the state's employment department, which is our labor agency. It is based on a trust fund model where both employers and employees provide contribution. There's a maximum gross payroll amount that's split between the worker and the business paying in. We do have provisions for small businesses. So if you have under 25 employees, you do not have to pay the business portion. It's kind of socialized that way. And then small businesses also have the opportunity to apply for assistance grants when they need a replacement worker. That's something that I think is unique to our program. We also have equal amount of leave time for all leave types. And in Oregon, we have family, medical, and safe leave. Safe leave is unique to only a couple of states. The ability to take leave if you're a survivor of sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking, those kinds of things. We also uniquely have 100% wage replacement for our lowest wage earners. So there's that. And we did offer, and other states have this, the ability for businesses to have equivalent plans through private insurers. And so we do have a portion of folks who have chosen that over the state trust. So kind of the blend of the two approaches.
Thanks so much. And last but not least, Elliot, who is actually from the state of Maryland, why don't you walk us through your paid leave program?
Sure, happy to. And it makes a lot of sense for me to go last. We are the newest state on the panel, and we are able to take advantage of some of the lessons learned in the other laboratories of democracy that have stood up these programs before us. We have a mandatory program, and so we take our role as stewards of Marylanders' tax dollars very seriously. As a mandatory program, employers and employees are required to participate in this program or in the system. We want to make sure that we do so in as efficient a manner as possible. And so we are looking at what other states have done to find efficiencies in their programs. I think Aaron and Karen and DJ have given some great examples of how that has happened. There's 4 big things that the legislature wants us to do. They want us to collect mandatory premiums, enforce job protections, regulate private insurance, and pay claims. And so there's 4 big things that they want us to do. And so we're trying to find areas in Maryland state government where we can find existing structures that we can work with. For example, if we need to collect mandatory premiums, we can look elsewhere in Maryland state government to see what structures are in place to do that. We have tax authorities, so there might be some opportunities there to find efficiencies in Maryland state government. So that's what we're doing now, is trying to look around at what other states have done, and look around elsewhere in our own government to find existing resources so that we don't duplicate efforts.
Absolutely. I mean, the thread that's weaving through a lot of this is there's a lot of different options on the table for employees and all, or employers in all of these different states beyond just going through the state government, whether that's tax credits, a private insurer. And so I'm wondering if we can go through again and talk a little bit about the pros and cons from your perspective of approaching those alternatives the way that you have. And DJ, we'll start with you again.
Sure. Well, obviously, a big benefit of our program is geared toward businesses, and New Hampshire is a small business state. And as I said before, there are a couple of features that I think make New Hampshire's program unique and particularly helpful to businesses. The first is, again, as I mentioned, we're having to compete with Massachusetts for workforce. Massachusetts has a mandatory program. And so for some of our businesses, they're already self-funding that benefit. So as part of our program, we offer a 50% tax credit on their business enterprise tax liability for the premiums that they put towards their employees. So that's an incentive not only for them to join the program, but it's also a little bit of a help to them because, as I said, if they're already self-funding that benefit, now they're getting a little bit of a financial incentive via their business tax liability for providing that benefit to their employees. So we think that that's a huge benefit as well. The other thing that we've provided to those businesses is the ability to work with MetLife to be flexible in the benefit design. The baseline design in New Hampshire is 6 weeks at 60% wage replacement. But those businesses can work with MetLife to say, we actually want a benefit that's a little bit richer. We want to say 8 weeks at 80%. Or 12 weeks at 100% wage replacement. So there's the flexibility there for that business to look at its needs, to look at the particular competition factors that they're dealing with, whether they're competing with businesses in New Hampshire or elsewhere in New England, and be able to fashion something that's going to work for them and make them as competitive as possible for those workers.
Erin, how is Connecticut approaching this question of giving employers, potentially a path to not go through the state?
Right. So our goal is to make sure that our Connecticut workers have access to the paid leave benefits. And so if it comes through our program, that's great. If it comes through employers who are offering what we call private plans, that's great too. We have currently 740 approved private plans, which covers approximately 50,000 Connecticut employees. So it's actually a very small percentage. Most of the employers continue to work with our program. Because it's employee funded, it was important to our legislature and our administration that the employees have the choice as to whether or not to use a private plan or to go with the state program. And so Connecticut is unusual in that employees have to vote. You cannot apply for a private plan unless the majority of your employees in Connecticut have voted in favor of that private plan. So we want to make sure that employees are getting what they are entitled to under the law and what they want through the mechanism that they want. And we work really closely with the insurers and the private plan employers to make sure that they understand their obligations. We have begun auditing the private plans to make sure that it's working smoothly. Employees are, again, getting what they're entitled to. And that's really the goal. We want to make sure that if an employee can't work because they're sick or they're caring for a family member because they need safe leave, that they're getting that benefit that they're entitled to, and to make sure that that's working smoothly for them.
I think that idea of subjecting it to a vote is so interesting. Karen, we'll go to you next. I mean, how is Oregon approaching these alternatives to, the state administered options on the table?
We also have that choice where you can be part of the state trust, or you can have what we call an equivalent plan. We have about 3,700 equivalent plans that are approved at this point. Folks can choose those equivalent plans at any point in time. That represents about 18% of the workers in our state. So it is not the majority, but certainly a substantial amount. Primarily, it's large employers that are in that bucket. I think that for us, we have an advisory committee that assists us in all of our implementation and policy making. It's really important for us that we're very customer centered, both for the business and for the workers. And so that advisory committee is made up of business, labor, and worker advocates. And we've spent years with them working on what that customer experience is, making sure that we're building a system that doesn't have sort of institutional barriers or typical bureaucracy to it. And so I think that's also built into the way in which we're approaching approaching and why we chose to do the state trust in the way we did.
And then Elliot, what considerations is Maryland thinking about as terms of, options other than the state for its employers?
Yeah, it's great to hear from the other states going into this conversation. I think as Karen in Oregon is experiencing, it's impossible to predict what the private market plan share will be. We're trying to construct our planning around that, to look at other states and to try to see what employers' interest in private plans are. That is an option in Maryland, and based on the other state experiences, we think it's likely to be a pretty large market share. And so with that in mind, we're telling employers that they have 3 options to comply with, as I mentioned, this mandatory program. They can obtain private insurance from the open market, they can self-insure, or they can use the state plan, what we're calling the state plan. And I saw a question come through the chat about just repeating the 4 things that we have to do. 2 of the things that we have to do are related to being an insurance company run by the state, which means collecting mandatory premiums and reviewing and processing claims through the state plan and paying those claims. Those are 2 big components that the state needs to do. The others are enforce job protections. We take that role very seriously. I think has been outlined very nicely in the BPC poll results. That's a crucial piece of paid leave programs and making them work and keeping people in the workforce, is making sure that they can stay with their current jobs. And then the 4th piece is regulating private insurance plans. And that's another area that we take very seriously and we think is important, this kind of integrator role that we can play to make sure that every worker in Maryland has access to paid leave and that their experience is as similar as possible, regardless of where the coverage is obtained, whether through the state plan, through a private insurance plan, or through self-insurance. We at the Department of Labor think that it's important that we can try to harmonize those experiences to the extent we can and make workers' experiences of paid leave in Maryland as similar as possible.
Yeah, that issue of job protections was a big consideration for the federal government when they were thinking about, enacting paid leave via the budget reconciliation process, which, not to be too wonky, but would have prevented lawmakers from including those very job protections that would guarantee that workers got their jobs back. I'm hoping that we can kind of actually tune into that channel now and talk about how your experience setting up, a state program or leading a state program has informed, the kinds of things you think Congress should take into consideration. Obviously, when the pandemic happened, there was a lot of debate over whether or not the U.S. should have a paid leave program. It is one of, if not the wealthy nation, depending on, which analysis you look at, that does not have a federal paid leave policy. And a lot of, I think, what will happen down the road as lawmakers continue to look at whether or not we should have one, is what is happening in the states, what's working well, what isn't working well. And DJ, I'd love to, again, start with you. What do you think about New Hampshire's program would inform this national conversation about whether the U.S. writ large should have a paid leave program?
Sure. Well, I think that New Hampshire is showing a different way to do it. I think my message to Washington would be, think outside the box, be innovative. There is more than one way to approach this. You can do so in a free market, private market way. And hopefully our program can be a model as to one way to do it. I would say that, our program is less than a year old. Our program went live last December. And despite the fact that it's pretty new, we already have over 22,000 Granite Staters that are currently getting this coverage. And we are ramping up our efforts for this fall, because this is the time when employers are making decisions about benefit offerings for 2024. We were at a bit of a disadvantage when the program came online last year or earlier this year because they had already made those decisions for 2023. So we're ramping it up, and I think our program is going to grow exponentially over the next year. And so that coverage is going to be available. And despite the fact that it is voluntary, despite the fact that it is private market, New Hampshire's program is universally available to anybody who is seeking it. So if you're an employee working for a business that chooses not to join the program, you have access to an individual pool. And we've made sure that individual pool premium is very, very affordable. We did that by working with paid family leave advocates to understand what the financial constraints would be on individuals and at what point that premium becomes a real disincentive for them to seek out the benefit. And so we capped our individual market premiums at $5 per pay period, which the advocate said would be appropriate. So again, we've worked through the details. We've brought an innovative approach to it. And so hopefully Washington will look to do the same thing.
Yeah, this option of, having tax credits on the table is definitely something that congressional Republicans at least have favored as an option. Aaron, what about Connecticut's paid leave program do you think should inform Congress's decision, and what kind of paid leave program do enact, if any?
I think one of the most important things that we see is to make sure that the coverage is available to workers who have multiple jobs or who work part-time or have to piece together a 10-hour week and then a per diem, and maybe they have seasonal jobs so that they're making the bulk of their money in one period of time, but then the rest of the year it's a little bit harder. There are a lot of people who don't work 9 to 5. There are a lot of people who have multiple employers, and it's important to make sure that they have access to both the job protection and the income replacement. That's one of the things we've been working really hard to educate Connecticut workers about, because Connecticut FMLA pre-2022 was really limited to workers with larger employers who worked at least full-time. And now the job protection is available much more broadly, and the paid leave is available much more broadly. And I think the federal legislation needs to make sure that those workers who are often forgotten are included in the program.
That's something that I want to, circle back to in a little, but before we get there, Karen, how about you? Oregon obviously has been doing this for a while now. What lessons are in there for Congress?
Yeah, I think that what you're hearing, and I'm nodding my head along with the other panelists, is there are all of these unique approaches. And so flexibility for states, I think, is going to be really critical, as long as federally the sideboards are being set up so that there are requirements. So, workers are able to take this. We're protecting both the businesses, but we're allowed to have those unique approaches in our state. I think that, job protections are critical. The discussion around how many days or months before you have job protections, I think, will be really important. In our state, it's only 90 days, and that's really different than some other laws. And so having that discussion about what that looks like so that it is consistent across the states, I think, would be an interesting conversation. I think the ability for all of us who've started and lead in this area for whatever federal legislation passes, the ability to interface with that so that we're able to continue our programs as they are will also be really important.
Absolutely. And Elliot, of course, you're still in the process of setting this program up, but as far as what you're taking in from other states and the facts and figures that are coming across, what do you think Congress should consider when it looks at a federal program?
Yeah, I just want to echo something that Karen just said about making sure that any federal policy takes into account existing state programs. It's really interesting to see the interesting differences and similarities across the state programs, but it seems like these are here to stay. And so federal programs need to make sure that they take into account the different state approaches, including New Hampshire, to make sure that those are in place and that we can have efficiencies and innovation continue. I mean, one of the kind of interesting things that's occurring to me in hearing the discussion is it seems like we're in an interesting moment where there's a debate about whether this is an employment benefit or if this is a social program with important social benefits. I think some of the PPC poll results have shown that there is an important social benefit to having paid leave, and that job protections are not just important for the financial security of an individual worker, but they actually have economy-wide benefits for keeping people in the workforce and making sure that we have a strong and healthy labor force that can continue to work in the United States. And I think that's an important role of paid leave. And so I think some of the differences in the approaches to paid leave programs at the state level reflect some of that discussion about whether this is primarily an employment benefit. Is this something that employers can choose to provide, or that they can buy a certain insurance product and not another? Or is it something that we've decided as a state that there's a floor for paid leave? We think everyone should have job protections, should be able to return to their job, not just for their own benefit, but also for the benefit of the workforce in the state.
A reminder that we will be taking questions at the end of this conversation. And so if you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to submit them in the live chat. You can also tweet them to the Bipartisan Policy Center using the hashtag that shows up at the bottom of your screen. I want to circle back to something that we brought up, which is this question of, inequality. Of course, a big part of the conversation when Congress eventually decided not to enact a paid leave policy was then the obvious, conclusion that in fact, the workers who will have paid leave will be primarily workers in, well, one, states like yours who have paid leave programs, but also, those who have higher earning careers, they have, the types of employers that would be more likely to offer them this benefit. And so it's actually this way of, really widening disparities that are already existing in our economy. I'm curious to hear, from you folks, because I know obviously this is ingrained in the program's success in your state. What are some steps that your program takes to address inequality? And I'm happy actually to start here with whoever wants to dive in first, because I know this is a bit of a complicated question.
We're all being so polite with each other. I'll jump in. We've been providing benefits for over a year and a half, so I think we're the old lady in the room. As I mentioned, our program is set up to make sure that it's available to workers who are working less than full time, and they can bring it with them. So you don't lose your protection because you've changed jobs. Eligibility looks at earnings from the past year, so it could be multiple employers or different employers. So I think structurally it's set up to make sure that we're covering a broad population of workers. And then from a authority perspective, it's really important to us to make sure that people know that we exist and to make it easy to apply. So we have a small but mighty outreach team within the authority, where thankfully the state's small too, but we cover the state. We try to provide materials in different languages. We try to make sure that we're hitting the quiet corner and the New York border and everybody in between, so that people know that the program exists and know that it is available to them. One of the things that we realized is many people just never thought it could apply to them. People kind of knew about pregnancy and maternity leave, but said, oh, well, there's never going to be a need for me. And so we have to say, that's probably not true. You're going to be most likely ill at some point in time in your life. You're going to have a family member who's ill at some time in your life. Our definition of family includes individuals who may not be related by blood or marriage, but have an affinity relationship. So an equivalent to a parent or a spouse or a sibling. And so we're trying to make sure that people understand you may not be legally married, but you have this long-term relationship. You can care for your partner. You can care for that person who has been the family member to you. And so trying to get that word out is one of the really important part of making sure that people access the benefits that they have coming to them.
Erin, why don't we go to you next? How is Oregon thinking about inequality as it pertains to paid leave?
It's actually very foundational to what we're doing, and a part of our entire ramp up to our go live, which was just this last week, was really embedding everything in what community needs and talking to folks about that, making sure that we're getting information out. I totally agree with Erin. All of the pieces around accessibility and outreach, we have whole teams of folks who are doing that. Our website's in 8 languages. 21% of our customer care folks are bilingual, multilingual folks. We want to make sure we also have people outstationed across our state geographically, so that we're just representative and able to serve people better where they're coming from. One of the tenets we have, I did mention earlier, was that our lowest wage workers get 100% wage replacement. And that is also foundational because as we get to the higher wages, it's a percentage. Clearly, that kind of shifts when you're middle and high wage. But for the 100% wage replacement for those lowest workers, the idea is that they are the most likely to not have any kind of leave in place that's paid. And so for them to have that same portfolio of options is really important because we don't know when we're going to have those important moments in our life that need to be covered. And it is much broader than just what people kind of think about in terms of like having a child or adopting a child or something like that. I think that's been the biggest hurdle for us in terms of outreach, is in making people understand that this could be something you need to use for your own illness or taking care of a loved one as well.
EJ, as the other panelist who has their program in place, how is New Hampshire taking into consideration addressing inequality and disparities?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned before, accessibility was a huge focus for the team that put our program together. As I mentioned, one of the ways that we tried to address some of that was putting that premium cap on for those individuals, for those lower wage workers. We were told that $5 per pay period premium would work. The second thing, obviously, is that universal access, so that even if you don't work for the large corporation that offers this, you still have access to that program. So whether you work for that big corporation or whether you work for a retailer, you're going to have access. Our program also foresaw the fact that you're going to have some of these workers who are going to be working in 2 or 3 jobs. They kind of cobble their jobs together to be able to maintain their lifestyles. And so MetLife has the ability to look at the individual situation, say, okay, your wage or your hourly rate is here at this job and it's different at this job, and figure out the math as to what the benefit is should they need to take it. And then, yes, we have been very, very aggressive in our outreach to to individuals to let them know about the access to this program. And again, we're about a year in at this point, and we're looking to really ramp up and work with the stakeholders at the community level to figure out how we can better fashion outreach messages to let people know about the opportunity that New Hampshire provides.
Elliot, what are some of the things that Maryland is thinking about as far as how it wants its program to address disparities?
Yeah, I'll just say it was important to the legislators who passed a bill for this mandatory social insurance program that it be a progressive structure, and we do have a progressive benefit amount. I think that's fundamental to the concept of social insurance, that it make sure that it provides an adequate wage replacement for lower income earners who spend a higher proportion of their income on necessities. And that's an important piece of just built into the hardware, the structure of our program. But there's a lot that we can do as administrators in the delivery of this policy to make sure that it builds in equities. I'm thinking about our role in that regard, kind of as like 3 separate roles, some of which I mentioned earlier. I think it's important for us to be a communicator, an integrator, and a monitor of the whole system across the state. We anticipate that many employers will make the choice to obtain private coverage. And we want to make sure that the workers in those private plans receive similar experience, as I mentioned, to employers that have chosen to go with the state plan or to self-insure. And so that means that we need to do a really good job communicating to every worker in the state. And this is something that we can do very well as the state government, is to say with authority, if you work in Maryland, you have access to paid leave, and you should seek it out when you need it. And that's the way that we're trying to reach workers who are not covered under our state plan. We're going to build in systems to do that. As an integrator, we want to make sure, as I said, that the experience is similar across all of the different plan types. And also for employers, that participating in this program is as easy as possible. This is a mandatory program. We know this is new for employers in the state, and we're going out in the community and we're hearing from employers that they have fears about this, they're worried about how this is going to happen. And so we're trying to make sure that this works for them. And as a monitor, that's kind of our role as an insurance regulator, and also as a regulator of employers with self-insurance, which we also think might be a viable option for many employers in the state. We want to make sure that those plans also build in equity and that people are receiving the benefits when they need them.
Well, that segues nicely into our audience questions. I have several more questions for our panelists, but in the interest in using our time as effectively as possible, I'll turn it over to our audience. And looks like we're getting a couple along the same lines here, which is basically feedback. What are you hearing from workers, employers, advocates in your state about your program? Be that positive or negative. And actually, Karen, let's go ahead and let's start with you because it's been a little bit longer. Can you tell us about what the response has been, from stakeholders?
I think workers generally are just thrilled that they have this option now. So we've gotten a lot of feedback from them that has been positive, building into the launch of paid leave here in Oregon. There are always all the questions about how it will work and all of those things, which create some spin so that we are educating folks. I think that for businesses in the beginning, as we spoke to them, a lot of fear around how many people would take advantage of the program, especially because it is very generous. But I would say that across the country, for states who've implemented prior to us, the highest take-up rate is like 6.5% or something in that arena. And so being able to talk to employers about what this looks like in other states and the fact that it's not going to be everybody going out on leave, that we have options for them to help them with replacement workers, et cetera. So I think that that has been a place where we've been able to really change the narrative with people and kind of calm those fears as we work through the implementation.
Erin, what about you? What has Connecticut heard from workers, employers, advocates about its program?
So the workers have been happy. They've wanted it for a long time. When we were starting to go live, when we were just collecting the contributions before we could have the benefits, they were saying, why aren't you doing this? We need this now. So they were very pleased to be able to have it. We had a large number of employers who supported the legislation. So I want to give credit and acknowledge that there are a lot of employers who recognize how important this is. There were also a lot of employers who were worried. People are going to just leave forever. They're going to take up the full amount of time. Our average claim duration is 7 weeks. We provide 12 to 14, depending on the leave reason. And so we're able to say, look, people are capable of rational self-interest. They're not going to just use up all their time if they don't need it. One thing that we weren't expecting, but was a really great outcome, is how it had sort of downstream impacts. So Connecticut, like many other states, has a childcare shortage, which was sort of highlighted and exacerbated by the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic. Our Office of Early Childhood told us that they could see a perceptible result, almost a third. So they had over 30,000, they were short almost over 30,000 seats for childcare prior to us going live with benefits. And after that first year with us going live with benefits, that number went down to about 22,000, so almost a third. And that's because parents, both parents, the pregnant parent and the non-pregnant parent, are taking bonding leave, are taking time beyond just a couple of days to recover, or weeks to recover from the medical trauma of giving birth, to be home with that child. Many parents are stacking that leave. So one parent is home, then goes back to work, and the other parent goes home. So the child doesn't need to go into daycare at 6 weeks old. The child may be going into daycare at 3 months old. And so that's actually benefiting all of the workers and all of the employers, because now there's more childcare slots open for everybody else, which I think is a simple illustration of how the existence of these programs actually benefits not just the people who are using them, but the overall working community and the employers.
EJ, how about you? How has the response been from workers, employers? I know you mentioned earlier that you had been in talks with advocates.
Yeah. So the feedback thus far from the business community has been overwhelmingly positive. Again, those businesses that were self-funding this benefit are appreciative now of a program that helps them financially to provide a benefit that they were already providing. There are other businesses that very much appreciate the flexibility that our program provides. And so we're really excited that that positive experience is going to translate into more businesses asking about the program and coming on board this fall as they're looking at their benefit offerings for next year. For individuals, I base it on the fact that the state oversees very aggressively several consumer satisfaction metrics in terms of their experience with MetLife when they call in and need to file a claim, or when they call in and want to purchase this benefit. And thus far, the consumer service metrics have been incredibly high. The turnaround time is quick. The number of drop calls is small. So I base some of what I suspect is the individual satisfaction with the program based on the fact that they're having a good experience when they interface with our partner.
Yeah. Elliot, is Maryland, soliciting things that workers and employers would like to see in the program?
Yeah, we tried something different and embarked on a radically open regulatory engagement process with our stakeholders, where we invited them to participate with us as we struggled through interesting policy problems that present themselves. Our General Assembly left a lot of important policy choices up to the administrators. And so we wanted to make sure that we engaged with stakeholders, with employers, with insurers, and workers to make sure that we were taking into account their needs when we made these important policy choices. They're really complex issues that my counterparts in other states all know about: intermittent leave, dealing with multiple jobs, making sure that job protections work, understanding what the base period is, making sure that that's applied efficiently and effectively across the board. And so those are the things that we're engaging with people who are very interested in the program and want to engage with us. But I will say anecdotally, and just in the very early stages of our community engagement work, is that a lot of workers and employers don't know about this yet in Maryland. And that is why we need to do a much better job fulfilling our main role as the communicator of this program. And fortunately, we have a couple of years to do so before benefits are paid. Our mandatory premiums start at the end of next year, so we need to ramp up that very quickly. But that is some of the initial feedback, which is we're not quite sure what this is and how this works. And so we need to do a better job of making sure that we get that feedback from employers and workers.
Looks like last question we'll have time for here. There's a few queries about the legislative process, specifically, any obstacles that may have needed to have been overcome. And, DJ, obviously your program is one of the newer ones. What did the legislative process look like, up until getting you to this point, basically?
Very difficult. New Hampshire got its program due to the sheer force of will of Governor Sununu, who really, really, really wanted this program. The dynamic we ran into is that the Democrats in our state's legislature wanted a mandatory program, and by and large, Republicans in the legislature didn't want any program. And so we had to really work with both sides to present this as a reasonable compromise. We had to talk with people about the fact that we wanted to take an innovative approach that, as I mentioned earlier, sidestep some of the pitfalls that other states had seen. And on the other side, in talking with Republicans, we had to get them to appreciate the fact that today's worker has different expectations about what benefit offerings should look like. They're looking for this type of benefit. And so if we want to grow economically as a state, if we want to be able to compete for workforce against Massachusetts and other northeastern states, then we've got to find a way to bring this kind of a benefit online, and that we can do so in a private market, voluntary, free market principled way. And so we eventually got both sides to the same place, again, not without some kicking and screaming, but there was a lot of just education. There was a lot of helping the legislature to understand that the program was a good program and that it was serving a very, very important need, not only for individuals and their overall health and quality of life, but also because of what we were hoping to achieve in economic development as a state.
Erin, what does the conversation with lawmakers look like in Connecticut on paid leave?
So, like New Hampshire, in Connecticut, I think the primary reason that Connecticut paid leave passed in 2019 was because it was a key initiative of Governor Lamont. It was something he had campaigned on, and it was very important to him when he came into office. It was a priority. And so the various bills that had kind of risen and died in the previous years didn't die in 2019. It required a great deal of compromise. There were strategy, conversations, different opinions, a threatened veto. There's a lot that got to the point of getting to what we have now. I think that's why we have an entirely employee-funded program. That was a key factor for folks. Having it be a quasi and not a traditional state agency was another key factor. So everybody, I think, from all the different stakeholders, have tried to think about what was most important, what we wanted to achieve, and then how could we ensure that those key goals were protected. And so that's it. It was sort of a triumph of the legislative process. It's really, I think, impressive as to how it all came together, because it had died for several years in a row before that.
Erin, curious to hear from you. Do you feel that Oregon's governor was also, a driving force in getting its program in place?
Yeah, absolutely. And similar conversations here, very hard conversations over many years. Governor Brown actually helped when she was in the Legislative Assembly to pass Oregon's unpaid leave program, which is OFLA. It's very similar to the federal Leave Act, but it was unique. And I think it was always her intent to get it to be a paid leave program. And she utilized that platform as the governor. I do think that also the discussion around the ability for private insurers to offer those equivalent plans was one of those compromise points. And the other piece was protecting small businesses. That's, I think, like many states, we have a majority of businesses are small here. We also have varying interests just geographically when you get outside of Portland metro area and what that looks like for all folks in the state. And so the compromises with small business not having to pay into the trust and also to have those assistance grants were big pieces of that final push that made it kind of get over the top.
Elliot, this is in the closest in the rearview mirror for you. What can you talk us through the legislative process in Maryland as far as getting paid leave set up there?
Yeah, legislators faced a number of interesting topics and challenges as they considered this law. The first paid leave, the first iteration of our paid leave law was passed last year, in large part due to the efforts of a legislative champion. I think that's one of the interesting differences that I'm noticing hearing the other panelists' remarks, is that our program was passed because of interest in the legislature and not from the governor's office in the past administration. Since 2022, there's been a change of administration. And also more amendments occurred during our legislative session this year to fix some things in the bill to make it more administrable, and there may be more changes in the future. So we are actually kind of in the midst of legislative discussions. We're kind of in the middle here. There's still a lot of fertile area for developing this policy and making it deliverable to workers and employers in Maryland.
That's about all the time we've got. I know that there were many more audience questions than we were able to answer, many more questions that I had that we were unable to answer. But I do want to take a second and just thank, Senator Fisher for her opening remarks, as well as our wonderful, wonderful panelists. Means so much that you were able to take the time. And thank you, of course, also to the Bipartisan Policy Center for putting on this event. You can check out that poll as well as their other recent work on their website. And that's about it for me. Thanks so much.